Chapter 11. Secret Bay, North Shore, Kauai. 1st of March, 2021. 1000 Hawaiian Standard Time. When Kai arrived home, he parked the truck and walked over to the AG unit in the far south end of his property. Opening the doors, he shifted past the collected instruments of peace. The push mower, the gardening tools, old ski parts he kept on a workbench. None of it was important now. Way in the back, underneath a bag of dog food, he uncovered a wooden crate. He keyed the combination into the small travel lock and lifted the lid. He retrieved a green duffel and unzipped it. For the most part, it was ready to go. Several pairs of serviceable boots, socks, clothes, a few shamags, an assault pack, and a chest rig. He also dug out his tan tactical cap with the Hawaiian flag patch still on the front. He smiled and put it on. Kai unzipped the assault pack and pulled it open. Its crevices were still lined with bits of sand and mud, dry as bone now. The remains of nearly a decade's use, a few knives, some chem lights, an old MRE or two. He pulled out the small black leather case that Keikoa had given him. He unclasped the lid of the modified map case and checked the contents. Lined neatly in a row were about a dozen gleaming spear tips, which had apparently been Keikoa's own invention during his time in the field. Some were simple tranquilizers. Others were thicker and designed to be filled with smokeless powder. When ignited, they had various effects such as smoke or explosives similar to flashbang grenades, but smaller and designed to be fired from any working rifle. They screwed onto rods which could then be inserted into the end of a barrel. The best part was that they were completely inconspicuous. To the untrained eye, the box looked like it contained a spearfisherman's tackle. He returned the case to the pack and re-zipped it. He zipped everything back into the duffel and slung it over his shoulder with the strap attached outside. He shut and locked the crate and walked inside the house. "What's that for?" McKenna asked with concern. "Just looking through some old stuff," Kai replied, walking to the bedroom where he shut the door. Retrieving the sat phone from the closet, he dialed Gunner again and waited for an answer. It was already early the next morning there. After the second dial, he finally picked up.
"Go ahead."
"Gunner, it's Kai."
"Kai? Well, fuck me. That's 2 calls in a week."
Gunner sounded sharper than last time. Sharp was good. "Gunner, listen. I spoke with Keikoa. I'm coming out there next week." Gunner paused a minute.
"You sure?"
"Yeah, I'm sure. Can you get me a pickup at Jomo?" A brief pause.
"Email me the dates and I'll see what I can do."
"I'll send them over tonight."
"I thought the old man would have talked you out of it by now."
Gunner sounded legitimately surprised. "It wasn't for lack of trying," Kai said with a tight smile. "I guess I'm a slow learner." Kai could hear a car door shutting on the other end of the line.
"I gotta run, Kai. You think this over front to back. I know you got a good thing out there, brother. You start kicking over nests and you might just find yourself some hornets."
"I'll email you." The other end went dead. Kai packed up the phone and zipped it into his duffel, along with the extra battery. There was a knock on the door and it creaked open before he could answer. It was McKenna. "Kai," she stared at him, her face serious and grave. Kai said nothing and went back to zipping the duffel, stowing it under the bed for now. He needed to get back over to Keikoa's. "Kai," she tried again. He stopped and sighed. He owed her some kind of explanation. Anything. Even if what he could give wasn't what she deserved. "What is it?" he asked, turning to face her. "What are you doing?" The tension in her eyes, the uncertainty in her voice. It made Kai feel 3 feet tall, but there was no turning away from this. He had to do what he had to do, so he leveled with her the best he could. "I need to go away for a couple days next week. Gunner has some information about Steven. He can't tell me over the phone, so I need to go talk to him." McKenna crossed her arms, and her uncertainty morphed into anger. "Oh sure, you're just gonna fly to Africa or wherever on a whim? To see Gunner? Do you really think that's a good idea?" "I don't have a choice."
"What the hell do you mean you don't have a choice? Of course you have a choice. Just like you had a choice 10 years ago. Just like you had a choice when we were teenagers. Do you think I'm stupid?" she demanded. "You think I don't know what you're going to do over there with that redneck idiot? You think that is going to bring him back? Do you? More people dead?"
His heart clenched as tears welled up in her eyes. She didn't deserve this. It wasn't her fight. "You're right, McKenna," he said heavily. "I do have a choice. And it's my choice. I'm choosing to do this. You never wanted to leave here, and that's fine. But I did. I wanted to see the world. And guess what? I saw it." His voice rose on those last words, surprising both of them as he forcibly steadied himself. "Let me tell you something. The world is not anything like this island. It's a mean, dark place, filled with mean, dark people, filled with wolves, he said passionately. More often than not, those wolves are the ones who win. They take what they want, they rape who they want, they kill who they want. You know who stands up to those wolves? You know who keeps this and every other place safe from them? People like Stephen. Even with tears on her cheeks and anger in her eyes, McKenna seemed to understand some small part of the anguish Kai had felt since learning of Stephen's fall. Kai had never really spoken to her about his life out there, about things he'd seen or things he'd done. But now, in this moment, he thought she deserved to know a little of it. He went out there into that dark world full of mean wolves day in and day out, and he was meaner. He was a lion, Kai roared. All of those guys were. They bled the ground red for this country, and what did they get in return? Some creep on Johnny Connell telling everyone they should have been more careful and changing the subject. That ain't gonna fly. He shook his head with grim conviction. Not while I'm still on the right side of a rifle. A tear rolled down her cheek and she put her head into her hands. I can't keep doing this. Kai stood there for a moment, knowing that no words were equal to the moment. At least none that he possessed. So he did the only thing he could. He kissed her forehead and walked out to the driveway, duffels in hand. He started the truck and Bob Marley came back on the radio. How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? It was getting dark as he pulled out of the driveway and headed towards Keikoa's. Chapter 12. Washington, D.C. March 11, 2021, 1500 Eastern Standard Time. The door to the meeting room slammed shut, and Gary Cofield made his way around the table and sat facing the man he had come to see, the FBI field director Gerald Morgan. He was a slightly built man, his thinning hair combed straight back atop his narrow face. Gary felt like leaping across the table and taking a handful of that hair out by the roots. Gerald, he said frostily as the other man ignored his loud entrance. Look at me, Gerald. The man looked up, his expression one of practiced disinterest. The Attorney General assures me that you are a very competent person, Gary said, glaring at the other man in brief but pointed silence before he continued. So perhaps you can explain to me why the fuck you let this get out? Gary slammed a printed article down on the desk, where the headline top spoke for itself. Ex-commander of the USS Ronald Reagan found dead. Questions remain. Gary drew several short, hot breaths through his flaring nostrils before shouting. Explain to me how a confidential investigation ends up on the front page of the fucking New York Times! The field director remained silent. Gary closed his eyes and rubbed his temples. Gerald? Gerald! You better say something, Gerald, or I'm gonna rip your fucking head off! His brother, Gerald finally replied. It was his brother. We had to notify the next of kin. We told him it was under investigation, but someone must have gotten to him. Gary slammed his fist on the table. I don't give a fuck about his brother! You should have had this whole thing locked down! He thrust an accusing finger into Gerald's chest before pointing the same finger out the window. I have 10 members of Congress crawling up my fucking ass and you're talking about this fucking guy's brother! Gary took a breath. I want to know what the fuck you're gonna do about this! Gerald shifted in his chair. Just calm down, Gary. We're going to speak to the press today and let them know that— Suicide! Gary screamed so loudly his voice broke. Gerald stopped speaking, a confused look on his face. Suicide! Gary repeated, this time with slightly more control. You're going to tell the press that you think it was a suicide. Well, I can't. Gerald, you really aren't listening to me. Gerald's eyes narrowed. I think I am. No, you aren't, Gary sneered, stopping to draw a handful of steadying breaths. Let me explain something to you. I spoke at great length with the director of the FBI before coming into this room. What do you think we talked about? Gerald cocked his head as confusion flitted across his features. I'm not— It's a rhetorical question, Gerald, Gary snapped. What I told him was that the president is very upset about the media attention the story is getting. And when the president gets very upset, he fires people. People like the director of the FBI. And if he decides to fire the director of the FBI, just how much fucking longer do you think you're going to last in here? Gerald said nothing as his eyes snapped back and forth in silent calculation. Satisfied the other man was finally on the same page, Gary continued. Exactly. Gary pulled a manila folder from his briefcase. I'm going to slide this across the table. I want you to read it and then slide it back to me. Maybe it will help illuminate to you why this is so important. Gary pushed the folder across the table. Gerald opened it and began to read. Gary watched as his eyes widened. Finally, he stopped and closed the document. Gary gestured to him and passed the folder back.
I'm entrusting you with this information, Gerald. I'm doing that because the director of the FBI and the Attorney General trust you. They assure me that you're the right man, a strong man, a man who should be allowed on the inside. Gerald sat up a bit as Gary put the folder back in his briefcase and continued. Now that we're finally on the same page, let's discuss how you're going to handle this situation. Gary grimaced. He hated giving away favors like this for what should have been nothing more than a single-cycle story about some morons who got themselves killed jumping into a situation they had no business in. But there was no choice. If he didn't get this contained soon, the shockwaves might become cataclysmic. Gerald cleared his throat and nodded. I understand what needs to happen. This was a suicide. All the indicators point to it. He had recently been relieved of command, he was unmarried, he was unhappy. Gary began to relax a little bit. Who's the first person you're going to talk to? We can do a press conference, Gerald said, stroking his chin in thought. We'll have the local sheriff give it after we've given him some talking points. Fine, Gary followed, but make sure this journalist... He paused, squinting to read the name of the article's author. Kailani Priest is there. Or at least watching. You don't need to sell me on this. You need to sell her. Understood, the FBI director nodded. Gary still wanted to tear the man's wispy hair out by the roots, but he had no time, so he stood. I assume I don't need to say anything else. I'm trusting you to handle this. Don't let me or the president down. With that, Gary turned and left the room. He hoped the pencil-necked bastard got the message. The truth was that he would be watching very closely. They would probably need to send someone down to Texas. He could see it now. Some bumbling local sheriff getting his 15 minutes of fame with the press. They had to make sure this guy would stick to the script, whoever he was. This investigation was only part of the problem. Despite all of their efforts, the story had somehow gotten traction at every level of media. The ongoing conspiracy theory had started to solidify, breaking out of sketchy blog territory and into mainstream conservative news networks. A congressional investigation wasn't a foregone conclusion yet, but it was getting dangerously close to happening. The theory went that the White House had botched a Sea King rescue mission and was trying to cover up the details. An investigation would be nothing short of a disaster. There were already calls to declassify the full military investigation. The CIA had assured him that they were working to locate any and all sources that were feeding the stories. WikiLeaks had promised to publish an interview with an exclusive source, most likely the dismissed naval commander. There was no telling if they had gotten to him on time. Time would tell. Gary strolled down the long hallway and into the lobby, passing the FBI crest as he walked up to the security checkpoint. Hung high on the marble wall, polished and bright, its scales loomed over the place. His lip curled in contempt as he pushed through the revolving door and stepped out into the cold air of the city with one thought on his mind. Justice has no place in politics.
Chapter 13. Keikoa's Lair, North Shore, Kauai. 9th of March, 2021. 2300 Hawaiian Standard Time. Kai pulled up to Keikoa's place in the mountains and killed his pickup's engine. His headlights stayed on for a moment, and he saw his uncle crack open the door and squint out into the glare of the headlights before going back inside. Kai got out and mounted the steps up to the porch as the headlights shut off and cast the place into darkness again. Inside, none of the lights were on, aside from the basement stairwell. Kai had never been into the basement, which had been locked during every other one of his visits, but now the door was conspicuously open, so he ventured down the steps. He found Keikoa at a computer in front of a row of lockers. There was a table behind him, spread with topographical maps. The whole room was lined with equipment, everything from gun barrels to surfboards and windsails of all sizes, along with several cases of gear Kai did not immediately recognize. "What is all this?" Kai asked, increasingly aware of just how much he didn't know about his uncle. "Take a seat." Keikoa gestured to a chair beside the map table. Kai sat and looked at the chairs more closely. They were maps of Somalia and the Gulf of Aden, labeled with everything from major shipping lanes to the locations of significant military activity in the past 6 months. Keikoa swiveled around in his chair and faced Kai. "You know what you're looking at here?" "Sure. Supply routes, airfields. Where did you get all this?" Keikoa ignored the question. "You're going to do this with or without my help. That much is clear. So listen to me carefully, Kai. I'm going to help you. But once this is over and you have your answers, we never speak of this again. And you put this life behind you once and for all. I've seen many men who didn't know when to quit, and they all paid the price eventually." Is that a reference to my father? Kai wondered.
Here you have a life.
He jabbed a finger onto the table, holding it there for a long moment before removing it.
That is all I'm going to say.
Kai nodded, acutely aware that his uncle seemed to have gained those phantom 6 inches of height for at least a moment. Okay, deal. Keikoa looked into his eyes until Kai finally looked away. After another moment, he spoke.
You're going to need papers to get into Kenya. Here.
He handed Kai a manila folder containing several forms.
You're an aid worker with a Christian ministry.
Kai opened the folder to inspect the documents while Keikoa continued.
I spoke to a contact in Somalia.
Kai didn't bother to try asking how Keikoa had a contact there.
He will meet you at the border and escort you as far as Mogadishu. The info is in that file. He doesn't get paid until the job is done, so don't worry about a shakedown.
Kai almost grinned. He rarely saw this side of his uncle. His elder's usual laid-back demeanor was now replaced with calm, laser focus. As he saw Keikoa in this new light, he grew uncertain which version of the man he preferred. Thank you, was all Kai could think to say.
Now listen to me,
Keikoa insisted.
You do what you need to do, and then you get out. Call me on the sat phone when you're finished, and I will arrange for a pickup. You're flying commercial into Nairobi. A bush plane will take you out to Gunner's. The pilot will meet you there.
Did you talk to Gunner?
Of course I did. Don't let that cowboy sweet-talk you out there. He's going to want you to stay. You remember our deal. In and out.
I will, Uncle.
All right.
Keikoa handed him a slender envelope.
Here are your flight details. You leave tomorrow morning. You go home and talk to McKenna now.
Kai was taken by surprise. Did you buy these?
Don't worry about how I got them.
Kai nodded before his visage darkened. McKenna doesn't want to talk to me. She thinks I'll never come back. His uncle looked at him intently.
Is she right?
Kai had no answer, so he made no effort to give one. Instead, he stood, and his uncle did the same. Kai embraced him. Thank you. I won't forget this. With that, Kai walked back up the stairs and out to the truck. As he started it, he knew that morning couldn't come soon enough. McKenna would try to stop him, of course. She didn't understand. She couldn't. Once he arrived home, he walked around to the shed in the backyard. He grabbed his duffel of gear and tossed it into the bed of the truck. The dog whined as he came in the door. He always slept by the door. Good boy. Kai spent a minute scratching Dojo's stomach before he headed up the stairs. McKenna was asleep in the bed. He sat on the edge of it and she turned over, as if instinctively sensing something was wrong. He looked at her in the dark for a moment. She spoke first. You're leaving? Kai sighed. Yes. She sat up. He brought her close and she let out a few sobs, but then stopped. He kissed her. I'll be back soon. She said nothing. Kai stood up and opened the closet. He pulled out the black case that contained the satellite phone and walked out the door. Downstairs, he left an envelope on the counter. She would read it in the morning. A few hours later, he was at the airport. The sun was just starting to come up. He rubbed his eyes and started his long walk to the terminal. He had almost forgotten what it felt like to leave. In some ways, it was harder, and in some, it was almost something you got used to. He wondered if this really would be the last time. Once inside the terminal, he came out of his thoughts. The place was already crowded with people catching early flights. He made his way through security and down to his gate without issue. Once there, he took a seat and looked at the television they had turned on. It was tuned to CNN. It appeared to be some kind of press conference. Another press conference. The ticker read, El Paso Sheriff's Department speaks. The sound was muted, but the man speaking looked nervous. He wore a brown police shirt with brass stars on the collar, and he was leaning heavily on the podium. Kai had stopped watching the news, so he hadn't seen the latest development. After a quick search on his phone, he determined what was going on. John Carmichael, the commander of the USS Ronald Reagan during the Sea King attack, had been found dead in his apartment. Police were saying it was a suicide. He was surprised the news had even picked up on this. Maybe it was from Kai's tip to the New York Times. He smiled at that thought. In some ways, this man's death disturbed Kai, but in other ways it had simply made him glad he was watching it from an airport on the way to Somalia instead of from his couch. He would find out what the truth was, one way or another. But will that be enough, he wondered, suspecting he wouldn't like the answer when it finally came to him. Regardless of how far this trip took him, Kai would know the truth. He'd probably even find a way to punish some of those responsible, but would that be enough? His anger at the thought of Stephen and his team being left to die out there on a sinking yacht had not abated one bit. If anything, it had grown stronger and more useful with each passing day, like brittle iron transforming into steel. His every thought was consumed with delivering vengeance for Stephen's death, but Kai himself was no longer certain if simple vengeance would suffice. Even if he took down every single man responsible for abandoning Stephen and his team, wouldn't they just be replaced by more like them? How many more Sea Kings did the world need to see before someone stood up for the fallen? How many more lions like Stephen needed to die at the hands of these despicable fucking wolves? And how many men like Kai would actually stand up for what they believed was right? Right now, all Kai had were questions. But if his life had taught him one thing about questions, it was that their answers always came in time. But only if he tracked them down. It was time to hunt. Chapter 14. McAllen, Texas. 9th of March, 1200 Mountain Standard Time. Leilani thanked the cab driver as she got out and faced the McAllen Municipal Building. Tan and nondescript, its only distinguishing feature was its name, written in steel letters above the entrance. That and the American flag, which rattled against its pole in the hot desert wind. It had been years since her last trip to Texas. That time had been to visit a friend. This time felt like a punishment. Robert Carmichael's brother supposedly lived within driving distance of here, and she was going to this briefing about nothing. She had been strictly forbidden from going anywhere or calling anyone outside of this press conference, at least in her capacity as a journalist. It was a matter of national security. Ross had been very adamant, as if to say, don't drag me any further into this than I already am. No, she wasn't here as a journalist. She was here for damage control. Whose damage, she couldn't really say. All she knew was that she had ruffled some feathers by asking around about the Sea King story, and frankly, that made her even more interested, but she needed to be careful. It was clear that the administration was trying to cover something up. It wasn't that she disliked the president. After all, she had voted for him. It was that this whole thing was so stupid. Why not just come clean? He was only hurting himself, in her opinion, by clinging to the obviously bad cover story. But still, she had to be careful about making enemies in the wrong places. He stood a good chance to be re-elected, which meant a potential of 6 years until he was gone. That was practically a millennium in the press. Still, the story interested her. She knew something was there, so why not do a little digging? She couldn't publish anything, but at least it gave her something to do. Stacy Long had come out that week talking about how cloud cover had interfered with the response team's GPS devices, making it impossible for the Navy to locate them for several hours. Leilani had worn one of those all the time in Iraq, and knew from first-hand experience that cloud cover didn't make a damn bit of difference. She also knew that cloudy days were rare in the Gulf of Aden. With all that in mind, Leilani had decided to follow up on the tip they had gotten and call the commander of the Ronald Reagan. Officially, he had been relieved of command after the incidents in the Gulf and sent to the Naval Reserve Center in McAllen. She tried reaching him there and got nothing. Finally, she had found his brother through Facebook and tried reaching him. He lived in Dallas and told her that Robert had turned up dead that week. The brother said that the police had mentioned homicide. She could hardly believe it. She had impulsively written a story and gone around Ross to publish on the Times webpage. That stunt had landed her here, but she wasn't done. This was the first interesting thing she'd seen in years. She wouldn't let on to anything until she had something they had to publish. And at that point, if it really was that good, she didn't care if it got Stacy Long fired. She had made her way into the council meeting room of the municipal building, where the briefing was to take place. There was a lot of local press there, gathered in the back. She took a seat in one of the tan metal folding chairs. After a long wait, the sheriff, accompanied by several others, made his way into the room and got up to the podium. She couldn't really tell who was who. Presumably some were local officials, others were detectives, FBI or state police. It didn't matter. This whole lead was buttoned up tight now. Whatever Robert Carmichael knew, he took to the grave. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen," the sheriff greeted. "We're going to go ahead and get started." Camera shutters started flickering and several flashes went off. "We're here today to discuss the death of Navy Captain Robert Carmichael and put to bed any rumors that may have been floating around in the press. As we all know, Captain Carmichael was in command of the USS Ronald Reagan at the time of the kidnapping of Katie Ansari." He paused, clearing his throat and taking a drink from a glass of water. Although this aspect of the story has gotten the most attention, this has very little to do with the actual story, which is about someone who likely suffered from depression for many years. More flashes and camera shutters flickering. The sheriff appeared to be sweating. He took another drink of water. You know, anytime one of these big cases comes up, it's upsetting. The military is a big part of our community here. Leilani's mind drifted. Why would the captain of the Sea King be so close to shore? Didn't they have some kind of protocol around that? The details around this case have been subject to a lot of speculation. The details are frustrating. I'm frustrated. But we're going to get to the bottom. Who trained the captain? Who owned the Sea King? By the time the press conference ended, Leilani had already started searching her phone for more details on the Sea King. The Wikipedia page was brief, but it mentioned that the vessel had been owned by Mendillo Entertainment, a private entertainment firm based in the UAE. She headed back to the airport as soon as the farcical press conference concluded. She would check the recording of the press conference and mine a few quotes to write up in her repair story about it for Ross later. In fact, she had written most of it before coming. The flight home she had been dreading now filled her with new excitement. She needed time to research and learn more about Mendillo. Whatever happened that day, the group had to be in possession of more details. She just needed to find them. Chapter 15. West of Wajir, Kenya. 15th of March 2021. 1700 Eastern African Time. The plane's engine sputtered and then hummed to life. Kai watched from the circular window in the cabin as they rolled down the runway and took flight over the city. Soon the cloistered buildings of Nairobi were replaced by green and red fields, and eventually by vast stretches of shrub-speckled desert as they flew west. By the time their plane bounced onto the dirt landing strip and rolled to a stop, the sun was already beginning to set. The co-pilot opened the door and Kai was greeted by a wave of dry heat that rushed into the cabin as he stepped out. The place was abandoned save for a black Toyota truck parked just off the flattened surface. A man stood in front of the truck, dressed in tan boots, gray utility pants, and a black t-shirt. From this distance, Kai could just make out his face, stoic behind the aviator sunglasses. It was Gunnar.
"Back so soon?"
he drawled in gravelly Texan as Kai approached. "I'm surprised you all lasted this long without me," Kai retorted. The man grinned from beneath his gray mustache. The sound of the plane's engine broke the silence as it started up again behind them. Kai continued to walk towards the truck as the craft turned around and prepared to take off again. Once Kai reached the truck, the two men shook hands and embraced. Kai dropped his pack in the rear seat and got in the passenger side. Being here felt natural, familiar, right. They drove for a few minutes before either man spoke.
"We kept a few of your things in a locker,"
Gunnar eventually said. "Good. I won't need too much." They were silent again for a moment until Gunnar spoke a second time.
"I understand what you're doing. I do." He paused. "But you're gonna end up getting yourself fucking killed."
Kai smiled. "Good a way as any." Gunnar grinned again.
"Hell, maybe I'll come with you."
Kai laughed.
"So how's that crazy uncle of yours?"
Gunnar asked with a smile. "He's all right. Living good. Living good."
"He was always good at polishing a seat with his ass,"
Gunnar snickered.
"Next time you better bring him with you. It's been a while since he showed me some of that karate shit he's into. He's probably nice and fat now from sitting on the beach all day. I bet I could finally take him."
Kai just laughed again. They drove for some time, and the sun had begun to set as they approached the Tiger Corps compound. They pulled up to a steel gate which served as the entry point to the site, which was otherwise walled off with HESCO barriers. The gate opened and a man with a carbine waved them through. Kai didn't recognize the man, but the inconspicuous collection of nondescript buildings fashioned from the Connex containers were almost exactly as he had left them. It felt like a second home. Gunnar parked the truck and they dismounted and walked into one of the buildings which served as Gunnar's office. It smelled like old mud and contained the same decor, an old Gadsden flag and a pyramid of Copenhagen cans. Gunnar sat down in his worn-out office chair and Kai sat in the plastic chair next to the desk meant for guests.
"Let's take a look here."
Gunnar turned on his computer screen, which was large and fairly nice, almost out of place with the rest of the office. He pulled a new can of Copenhagen from his pocket and put a pinch behind his lip as the machine started up. Once it was on, he pulled up a satellite map with a military grid reference system, or MGRS for short, overlain onto the image.
"You'll probably want to cross here, west of Wajir,"
he gestured to the map.
"Less border police there."
I have papers for you. Bribe your way across and head to Bardera if you need to rest. I'd recommend keeping a low profile, he smirked, then held an empty water bottle to his lips and spit. Kai knew Bardera. It was a shithole. Frankly, the whole country was a shithole. Outsiders generally didn't go to outlying towns like that, especially not alone, but it was a risk he'd have to take. From there, it's going to take you 3 days to get up to the north coast where these shitheads launch from, Gunnar continued, referring to the pirates. He spit again, and then set down the water bottle and opened a metal file drawer next to the desk. Here's your boy. He pulled out a folder and handed Kai a printed picture. Mohammed Mombasi, he said, pronouncing the name with his thick Texan drawl. He looked like any other Somali, but a bit fatter and with a receding hairline. He runs all of the gangs up here. Declared their allegiance to Islamic State last year. Kai took a mental picture as Gunnar spoke. Now he ain't gonna be hanging around the fucking dock with these guys, Gunnar warned. You're gonna have to get creative. But he knows what happened. Nothing happens up there without him knowing it. Kai nodded as Gunnar put the file back in the cabinet, and then picked up his spit bottle again. You know, I really thought if one of us was going to get killed, it would have been on the Baltic. He smiled as he spoke, but Kai could see the emotion in his eyes. The last time they had been together with Stephen for an op was on the Baltic Sea during a contract mission. Gunnar was right. It was surprising they had all made it out of that one. They had airdropped onto a Russian tanker using modified parachutes, which he'd later learned were partially designed by Keikoa. It had been a stormy night, as if the jump wasn't already difficult enough by itself. It was the first ever landing of its kind, at least to their knowledge. The jump itself was dangerous enough, and that was before they had to work through a ship filled with Russian security forces. Yeah, at least then we called our own shots, Kai said, surprisingly resentful at the wistful note in his own voice. Gunnar nodded. Why don't you go rack out and we'll get your gear set up tomorrow. Chapter 16. Mogadishu, Somalia. 15th of March, 2021. 1100 Eastern African Time. Income had been down for weeks, and Mohammed Mombasi was sick of excuses. The daughter of the American president, they said. Do this and you'll be set for life, they assured. Thieves and liars. Infidels. He should never have trusted them. Now he was stuck with a big problem. The American Navy was patrolling the entire coastline. His people could hardly even approach Somali vessels without being fired on. What should have been his greatest triumph had turned into an unmitigated disaster. One thing he knew for certain, this crew of his had to go. Good for nothing but excuses, the lot of them. There were other ways to make money. Foreign aid, government bribes, charging more for cot, anything. He looked out at the calm sea, and the breeze coming inland was refreshing. He hated going out there, but he was about to start taking boats out himself if things didn't improve. Pledging allegiance to the Islamic State had hardly done anything but give him more problems. He had been promised fighters, weapons, money. He had gotten nothing but endless email messages, some of them asking him for money. He had half a mind to abandon the jihad and pledge an alliance with the government. At least they paid some of the time. Things used to be simpler. Back then, when the Americans had gone, they were gone. Now, they never left. And along with them, he now had the Chinese and the Russians to deal with. Cockroaches, all of them. They made it seem as if they were doing him a favor by letting him alone in his own country. Who were they to be here? It was a shame he couldn't kill more of them. Self-righteous invaders. "Will there be anything else, sir?" the waiter asked in Arabic. "No," he replied without making eye contact. Soon, he would barely be able to eat here anymore. He almost laughed at the thought. He leaned back in his seat and pulled a box of matches and a cigar from his pocket. This hotel was a shamble. It wasn't always so bad. Not back when he was a boy. Back then there were more tourists, more whites, more easy money just walking in. Nothing came easy here anymore. Still, the covered patio where he kept a table reserved was a nice view. Relatively quiet, the place was situated on an overlooking hill. He could see past the shacks that lined the streets to the shore, down to the white sands and the ocean. On some quiet evenings here, when the sun was setting and he had a woman with him, he could almost imagine he was in Italy, Spain, or some other such place he had never been. Even if the hotel crumbled down to the foundation, at least he would always have the view. He checked his wristwatch and sighed in irritation. He was supposed to be meeting some of his local boys, the ones who ran the street operations along with some of his boats. They were always easy to impress, easy to scare. He enjoyed the meetings, at least more than the ones he had with those cockroaches from the government. Just as he began dreaming up inventive punishments for the tardy group, It finally arrived. His guards brought them to the table and they sat down without a word. They looked around uncomfortably. He flashed a pearly smile at seeing their nerves on display. He missed his days of running around like they did. In some ways, he even envied them.
Hello, boys. How's business?
One of them spoke up.
It's good, boss.
Good, he repeated with feigned disbelief.
I don't think it's very good. You aren't bringing me enough money. How do I know you aren't pocketing it, huh? Maybe I should have one of my guards over there cut you open and see if you're hiding it.
Their mild anxiety turned to abject terror.
No, boss. Business is bad this month. We're barely eating, we swear.
One glance at their softening middles and full cheeks gave the lie to their words.
I don't care,
he snapped, flashing his teeth in a shark-like grin.
Let me tell you something. I have been good to you, boys. I have made you something, and this is how you repay me? With excuses?
Mombasi paused to let his words take effect. As he did, he noticed a man walk onto the patio. A white man, or at least whitish, with confident good looks which no doubt served him well with the ladies in whatever soft-bellied country had spawned him. Mombasi smiled at his good fortune. Had Allah heard him after all? The boys had said nothing, so he spoke again.
I think today is your lucky day, my boys. On your way out, I want you to look at the man sitting over there.
He inclined his head towards the newcomer.
That looks like a great business opportunity to me.
They all turned around at once. Idiots.
Fools! Look at me!
He sneered, causing them to turn.
Is this your first day? Should I have you all killed and start fresh?
He asked, careful not to let the mark see his emotions.
I think maybe I should. Listen to me. You need to get more aggressive. You need to follow him and see what he is doing here. Do you understand?
They looked unsure until one of them finally spoke again.
I don't know, boss. Whites like that have security. You don't know that,
Mombasi snapped.
Besides, it doesn't matter. You all owe me, and I am not going to forgive your debt lightly.
He pulled on his cigar, letting the smoke roll from his mouth and drift slowly upwards.
But boss, what if he has guards? Do I have to explain everything?
He growled.
You kill whoever gives you any shit. Anyone else, you tie up and bring to me, alive.
Where should we bring them?
The taxi lot on the other side of town, he replied. I will take it from there. I gave all of you bullets last month. You better not have wasted them. You think they came for free? No, boss. Good. Whites like this might look scary, but let me tell you something. They are all afraid to die, even more afraid than you.
He smirked with a contemptuous shake of his head.
You put that gun right in their face, kill one or two if you have to, and the rest will give up. Do you understand?
The boys nodded. They were nervous. Mombasi raised his hand and snapped.
Waiter, bring these boys some cigarettes and basto. He smiled. Do your jobs, and we will all benefit from this good fortune.
Chapter 17. Mogadishu, Somalia. 16th of March, 2021. 2200 Eastern African Time. Kai had arrived in the city a few days ago, and he was getting impatient. The locals had not even tried to jump him yet. They must have really been spooked after the events of the last few weeks. He decided to take a walk to the hotel bar again, where some local fighters might still be hanging out. Keikoa had made good on his word to set him up with a contact. The man, a local who went simply by Ace, had driven him all the way from the border, even gave him a place to stay. Since arriving, Kai had made himself conspicuous, purposefully trying to attract some attention, and Ace had been getting increasingly worried about him. Kai tried to reassure him, thanked him, and told him that he would not be staying much longer. But he was starting to wonder if that really was the case. As he walked down the street, he watched two dogs chase each other, careful to jump over the little rivers of refuse that made their way down the sides of the street in this part of town. It was dark now, but hardly any cooler. He swatted at a mosquito. With no streetlights, few were out past dark. The streets took an eerie silence in places like this around this time. He had left most of his gear at Ace's house, a small two-room place with a little yard where he kept his car, an old red Mercedes. Assuming the hotel didn't pan out after he arrived in another 15 minutes, he'd head back to Ace's for the night. Suddenly, headlights appeared behind him. He turned and saw a truck. His heart began to race as he realized what was happening. He stood, feigning stunned surprise as he watched the vehicle approach. The driver slammed the brakes and skidded a bit on the dirt street. He stood there for a moment, staring into the black windshield. Their hesitation told him they expected him to run. Finally, the door opened and a man emerged with a Kalashnikov in hand.
"Don't fucking move!"
he screamed in a thick accent, brandishing the rifle like he expected it to intimidate Kai. Kai stood motionless, watching the other man's body language. He reeked of desperation, and his bloodshot eyes suggested heavy stimulant use. "Don't fucking move!" the Somali repeated, his voice as tight and loaded as piano wire. Kai slowly put his hands up, hoping to calm him. The man, who was really more of a boy, walked up to him. Without warning, he slammed the butt of the rifle into Kai's nose. "Asshole!" Kai thought as he fell to the ground. Just like that, 3 of them were on top of him, tying his hands with twine. They dragged him to his feet and put him onto the bed of the truck, which had an RPK mounted to the roof of the cab. Kai snorted and blew the blood out of his nose. Idiot kid. The driver slammed the gas and they rode off into the night. After about 30 minutes of frantic driving, they pulled into the gated compound with about 24 taxicabs parked outside a warehouse-type structure. He could hear waves. They were near the coast. The boys hopped out and dragged him out of the bed. One of them held each arm and they half-assed frog-marched him into the warehouse. Once inside, Kai saw rows of stacked crates, sacks of rice, fishing nets. The place must have been a collection and distribution operation, and they put Kai down in between a pair of loaded pallets. The boys laughed and talked happily amongst themselves in Arabic as the minutes began to pass. Kai remained silent, observant. After waiting for what felt like hours, a man finally came through a door in the back and approached them. The newcomer spoke to the boys in Arabic. It was hard to tell in the dark, but Kai thought this was the man from the restaurant. It's him all right, he thought after catching a clear profile view. After speaking, the boys left, and 2 other armed men approached Kai and prodded him towards the room the man had come from. It was a small office. They sat him down in a dirty folding chair. There was a fan, an old computer, and a box of cigars amongst other articles. The guards remained until the man entered and signaled them to wait outside. "Hello, my friend," the man greeted. Kai said nothing. "I am sorry about your nose. My boys get a little scared sometimes. My name is Mohammed. What is your name?" "My name is John," Kai replied in a soft voice. "John Stewart." The man smiled. "John Stewart, what brings you to my country?" "I work for the State Department. They're going to know I am missing." The man sat back in his chair. "My boys told me you were alone. Not very safe, John. Didn't they tell you that at the State Department?" Kai said nothing. The man looked at him for a moment, like a butcher eyeing a side of beef, before he summoned the guards. They dragged Kai outside to the warehouse and took him to the back, where there were a few cages large enough to hold a man. They put him inside one and locked it, walking away. The other cages were empty aside from one. Kai's fellow prisoner looked like a local, dressed in a dirty suit and sleeping on the ground. Kai sat down facing the cage door, leaning back against the bars. He started twisting his wrists until the twine came loose. The pain of the twine biting into his skin was considerable, but he ignored it. After a few minutes' effort, he was able to slip a hand free. He used it to wipe the sweat from his brow and some of the blood from his nose and mouth. He returned his hand to the loosened cords, pretending he was still bound as he scooted towards the front of the cage. He took a deep breath, steadied himself, and let out a primal scream. He started kicking the bars of the cage, rattling them all. He waited for a moment. Nothing. He resumed screaming and kicking, even more energetically than before. After a few more moments, one of the guards finally came around. He pointed the gun at him, cursing at him in Arabic. Kai ignored him and continued his antics, even after the guard brandished the rifle in what he probably thought was a menacing fashion. Finally, the guard approached the cage and unlocked the door. He raised his rifle and swung the butt down at Kai. Swiftly, Kai grabbed the rifle and pulled the man down, using his own momentum against him. The guard screamed in surprise as Kai got on top of him and drove his boot into the man's head several times. Kai managed to rip the rifle from the guard's hands before any rounds went off, and he promptly finished the guard off by driving the rifle's butt through his nose. Kai could hear footsteps coming his way. He moved out of the cage and crouched in the shadows just across from it. The first would-be reinforcer ran up and stopped in front of the cage. Before he could turn, Kai put the buttstock into the back of his head and he fell against the cage. The previously sleeping prisoner was now standing in his cage, watching with wide eyes. Kai needed to move quickly. He moved around the edges of the warehouse until he reached the door of the small office. He took a handkerchief from his pocket, pulled the door open, and saw Mombasi standing 2 steps from the door. The self-styled warlord moved to snatch a pistol from the nearby desk, but he was out of shape in practice. Kai intercepted him, grabbing Mombasi by the neck, and slammed him onto his face. He sank one arm around Mombasi's neck and shoved the handkerchief into his mouth with the other. The man struggled wildly at first, but Kai subdued him with several sharp punches behind the ear. He then used the twine to bind his hands behind his back. Holding him around the neck with his left arm and aiming the rifle with his right, he made his way to the warehouse's entry. The men at the front of the compound were probably still unaware of his escape, but discovery was only a matter of time. Mombasi struggled, but a hard thrust of the rifle's muzzle into his back took the fight out of him. They waited in the windows for a few minutes until a car pulled up. It idled as a couple of guards walked over. Finally, someone got out of the passenger side and the guards walked with them into the warehouse. Mombasi started to struggle as they passed, and Kai squeezed him tighter. This was their chance. They would have only seconds. Once the men passed, Kai stood up and approached the car with Mombasi. He ripped open the driver's door and pointed the rifle towards the man's face. He got out of the vehicle. Kai opened the rear passenger door and pushed Mombasi in. The driver ran towards the warehouse and shouting arose from the warehouse door. The gig was up. Several men ran out with rifles. Kai fired 6 rounds. 3 of the men fell. He got into the vehicle and put it into gear. He pulled back up the drive as he heard more shooting behind him. A few rounds hit the trunk. The guards were yelling as he approached the gate. Kai stomped the gas and ducked as automatic fire hammered into the car. Weapons fire continued behind him, but he was already through. Mombasi kicked the window, but failed to shatter it. Kai jerked the wheel hard, tossing him against the far door's metal handle and opening a long gash across the top of his head. "Stay down!" Kai barked as Mombasi bled all over the back seat. Though the wound was superficial, the amount of blood gushing from it had a calming effect on the bound and gagged warlord, which made Kai's job that much easier. They sped through the city, and Kai kept his bearing west. Eventually, he was able to slow down a bit, and soon they had reached a more remote area. After driving for almost an hour, Kai pulled off the road. Once they appeared to be out of sight from any kind of settlement, Kai stopped the car. Mombasi had spit out the rag a few minutes earlier, and relocated his nerve. "You would be dead for this!" Kai got out of the vehicle and opened the back door. He dragged Mombasi out onto his knees in the sand. Kai hit him several times to soften him up. Then he gripped the furious warlord by the collar and fixed him with a hard look. "You're going to tell me some things about your attack on the Americans, or you're going to die." "Fuck you!" Mombasi snarled in his thick accent. Kai looked at Mombasi. The man was bleeding from more than just his head. He was bleeding from just below his ribs. He must have been hit during the escape. "Damn!" Kai grimaced. He didn't have long, so he untied the man's hands. Dragging him back to the car, he opened the back door and placed Mombasi's hand inside the latch, holding him down with his boot. Kai slammed the door against that hand 4 times, crushing bones with each blow and causing Mombasi to scream like a stuck pig. Kai gripped him by the collar and gave him the same hard look. "Next is the rest of your arm." Mombasi screamed and struggled defiantly. Kai pulled the other man's arm further into the car to make good on his threat, but Mombasi suddenly ceased to struggle. "Okay," Mombasi pleaded with wild eyes. "No more! Please! What do you want?" "The day you kidnapped the president's daughter," Kai said, turning the other man's face up towards his own. "Why were you that far off the coast? Why were you outside of a shipping lane?" "You told me to," Mombasi said in what seemed like confusion. Kai sneered and pulled the man's arm towards the door again. "Please, please," Mombasi pleaded. "What do you want? I'll tell you anything." "What the fuck are you talking about?" Kai demanded. Mombasi's eyes clarified, like he suddenly realized something important. "Who are you? You're CIA?" "Yeah, I'm CIA," Kai lied. "Now answer my question. Why the fuck were you out there?" "You told me to go out there!" "We told you?" Mombasi's eyes widened. "You're not CIA." Kai kicked him several times in the gut and ribs, dropping him onto his side until Mombasi was dazed and gasping for air. He needed more information before moving on. "What did the CIA tell you?" Kai demanded after Mombasi finally drew something resembling a full breath. "You fucking Americans," Mombasi began, only for his words to become a primal scream when Kai stomped on his hand. "Do you want to die?" Kai asked, his voice grim and flat. "You told me where to be," Mombasi repeated. "You told me! I went! I didn't know about anyone's daughter! Please!" "This doesn't make any fucking sense." Kai shook his head. "The ship that you took them from, what happened to it?" "We sunk it." "Why would you go back?" Kai pressed.
You told us to be there! You said we will make a deal! You said no military!
Who said that?
You did!
Mombasi repeated again. This wasn't going anywhere. Kai opened the driver's door and pulled out the Kalashnikov. You have one more chance, Mohammed, Kai declared with finality. Tell me who told you to be out there. Who told you they wanted to make a deal?
You did! CIA did!
That's as good as you're going to get from him, Kai thought. Fine. Kai leaned down. Let me tell you something, asshole. You killed my best friend out there. His name was Stephen Erickson. Mombasi's eyes widened as Kai brought the rifle up between them.
You told me to! You told me—
Kai fired a single round which echoed across the desert, and Mombasi fell silent. Chapter 18. Mogadishu, Somalia, 23rd of March, 2021, 1600 Eastern African Time. The crackle of gunfire echoed through the narrow streets. It was getting closer. Speed up! Get us onto the highway! Mitch Stevenson placed his hand on his service weapon. The city was in chaos. Mohammed Mombasi had been missing for a week and was assumed dead. Two rival factions had emerged and were now fighting openly for control of the capital. No one had seen this coming, not even the CIA. It was a complete embarrassment, a disaster. Mombasi had been an invaluable asset whose contributions were vital to virtually every operation in the area. They had finally achieved some semblance of stability in the region, and now it was back to square one, assuming he survived. More gunfire erupted, closer still. Get us onto the fucking highway, he snapped. The driver threw his hands in the air, exasperated. Muhammad al-Wahushi, who represented the jihadi sect of Mombasi's former organization, was making a play to wipe out his rival, President Abshir Abdullahi, who now commanded the moderate faction of Mombasi's militias along with the government army. The militia had backed Abdullahi because they thought he had the advantage. But now, if he couldn't hold the city, they would be expelled and everyone in their families would pay the price in blood. To Mitch Stevenson, the outcome looked like a foregone conclusion. Al-Wahushi had already taken the government quarter and the government troops were now fleeing into the desert, or taking off their uniforms and hiding. He needed to get a small army of private contractors in here or they would lose the city, a loss that would set them back decades. Their SUV skidded as it lurched around a turn. From the back seat, Mitch could see the highway entrance come into view, and that view made his stomach sink. His heart began to race as he watched men unload tires off the back of the truck and onto a burning pyre in front of the exit. Thick, black smoke billowed from the pile and sat heavy in the air. Mitch could already taste the burning rubber, they were so close. He drew the pistol from his waistband. "Get us out of here!" he hissed. "Head west!" Mitch's assistant, a new agent, looked at him nervously. Poor kid. "Get your weapon out!" Mitch grunted. The driver turned their vehicle and started down a street parallel to the highway. The men building the fire pointed at them. One pointed his Kalashnikov in the air and let out a burst of fire. Mitch flinched. Nothing about this situation felt organic. It stank of an op gone bad. Mombasi had been untouchable. That had been made clear to every intelligence agency west of the Baltics. The Russians or the Chinese had to be involved. No one else could pull something like this right under his nose without him catching so much as a whiff. But why? He found himself wondering even as his driver slewed down the street with staccato gunfire all around. And why now? Nothing they had seen over the past year indicated anything like this, and there was no immediate incentive to destabilize Somalia. Stranger still, the night Mombasi went missing, he had personally called in a pickup for a State Department employee, John Stewart. A little digging had shown there was no John Stewart, not even on paper. By the time they had called back, Mombasi was already gone. Mitch had put out a surveillance order for any non-government foreign nationals in the country. After analyzing the list, they had come up with a few names. The most promising had been one out of Hawaii, a missionary who entered through Kenya. The whole identity was fake, but beyond that they knew nothing. They needed to get out of the city and head north towards the border. There they would rendezvous with their private contractors and try to salvage the situation, and if Mitch was lucky, his career. Suddenly there was a horrendous noise under the hood of the vehicle, like spinning metal and snapping cables. "What the hell was that?" "We hit something," his driver replied. The vehicle had slowed, and now it sounded like they were dragging something. "Don't stop!" Mitch barked. The young agent seated next to him looked like he was going to pass out. There was another sound, more spinning and snapping. "Step on it!" The engine growled in protest, and the vehicle began to slow. Finally, they came to a rest. Mitch raised his weapon, staring nervously outside. They were still near the highway, where it was a bit more open, but for now they were sitting on a 2-lane road with buildings on either side. The area looked to be commercial and seemed quiet. He opened his briefcase to pull out the satellite phone. They needed an extract. There was a sound like a hammer hitting the roof. The young agent screamed and grabbed his face. "Shots!" Mitch crouched behind the driver's seat. The young agent groaned. Blood poured heavily from his shattered jaw, seeping through his fingers as he tried to cover it. "Just stay calm. We just need to—" Mitch was interrupted by more blows to the roof, and a window shattered. Mitch knew immediately the kid was already dead. Mitch opened the door and crawled out. The driver's door opened and the man started running down the street. "Idiot!" Mitch seethed, hoping to locate his assailant when he killed the driver. 2 shots rang out in rapid succession. The driver dropped before Mitch could even try to locate the source of the rounds. This is no Somali gang. Mitch set his jaw, crouching behind the ruined car. Has to be the Russians. It's always the Russians. Mitch looked into the vehicle. His briefcase was on the seat, just within reach. He had mere seconds. He dove for it as 2 more rounds pierced the roof, but he reached it and scrambled back onto the street. Dropping the pistol and ducking his head, he unfolded the phone and started dialing. He heard approaching footsteps, sharp and crisp. The phone started ringing as a shadow appeared on the other side of the vehicle. "Pick up!" Mitch's nerves began to fray. "Pick up!" "Drop it," a calm voice commanded in perfect English as the speaker stepped around the rear of the SUV. He was tall and tan, dressed in tactical gear and holding a rifle. Something protruded from the end of it that almost looked like a bayonet. "Fuck you," Mitch quipped. "You'd better kill me and get the fuck out of here while you still can." Mitch heard the line connect. "Yes." Before Mitch could speak into the line, his attacker fired the rifle. Mitch felt the wind leave his chest. The shot was loud, almost too loud for an AK. He looked down in stunned horror to see a metal shaft protruding from his chest. Not a bayonet, he realized in bewilderment as the phone slipped from his fingers. A fucking spear gun? "You asshole!" Mitch tried to speak, but it came with great difficulty. "What the hell?" The man said nothing and watched him with steady eyes. But those eyes were not the cold, professional windows he expected to see from a contractor. They shone with anger that bordered on hatred, and not the blind hatred of zealots which Mitch had seen too many times in his career. No, this was something different. Mitch's eyelids began to feel heavy as he drew short, labored breaths. It was so hot. He heard more shooting, but it sounded far away now, as if through a tunnel. The man started towards him, and the world faded into darkness. Chapter 19. Mogadishu, Somalia, 23rd of March, 2021, 1630 Eastern African Time. Kai stood over the man as he collapsed. He had been holding a sat phone when he lost consciousness, so Kai knelt down and shut the device. He ended the call and threw it onto the roof of the 2-story shopfront building next to him. He didn't have much time, and would have even less if he didn't get out of the hot zone. Kneeling down once more, he lifted the stout man whom he had shot with the tranquilizer and hoisted him over his shoulder. Before walking away, Kai took one last look at the vehicle. He considered burning it, but that would take him at least 2 minutes and time was already against him. Security would arrive at any moment, so he had to move now. Just before he turned away, something caught his eye. A black briefcase on the seat. Kai grabbed it and fell back to a side street where he had parked his own vehicle. He loaded the unconscious spook into the trunk, hearing gunfire in the distance. It was time to go. Kai put the vehicle into drive and pulled around the corner. This chaos was his friend, but he needed to get out of this part of the city, to someplace he would have some time and would be able to cover his tracks. He identified a little building near the pier that would do the trick. Far enough from the fighting and looting to give him some privacy, but close enough that it would be abandoned. He bounced through some back alleys and tried to avoid main roads or anywhere he could see smoke. The old jalopy he had commandeered had no AC, so he was driving with the windows down. It was hot that day, and every smell intensified in the dense humidity. He neared his destination and pulled the car into a large lot which sat across from the pier. Some gulls squawked overhead. There were some parked cars, but the place seemed empty. He needed to get set up. His passenger would come around soon. He parked, shut the engine off, grabbed a roll of duct tape from the glove box and collected the briefcase. Opening the trunk with supplies in hand, he found the man in much the same state he had left him, except he was now sweating profusely. Kai ripped the G-Man's suit jacket off and removed the body armor, tossing both in the dumpster next to the lot. He then went to work with the duct tape. Once he was satisfied, he pulled the man from the trunk and set him next to the car. A short burst of gunfire sounded in the distance, followed by a longer burst in reply. Kai hoisted the man over his shoulder again and made his way across the street to the small blue building he had marked. It sat at the end of the loading dock, so beneath it and beyond was the sea. The windows were opaque from years of unchecked exposure to salt and sea foam. Kai kicked the door near the handle, and it burst open. He placed the man on the ground and looked around at his surroundings, finding nothing inside but a few ropes. He looked down at the man again. This was Mitchell Stevenson, all right. Kai had been able to case him easily, all things considered. Somalia had precious few nice cars, so one could only do so much to stay under the radar unless you lived like a local. Kai deduced that this spook was either a senior agent or the station chief. He would find out as soon as the G-Man woke. In the meantime, Kai pulled over a stool and started working his way through the briefcase he had found. There were a few files, mostly just schedules and briefings on locals, nothing interesting. It also contained a laptop, which aligned with Kai's expectations. He wasn't sure if there was a tracking device on it, but there wasn't much he could do about that. Some of these agents had tracking devices in their shoes, or if rumors were to be believed, even in their bones. But tracking device or no, the agency would triangulate him sooner or later. He just needed to be gone when they did. Of course, the laptop was locked. There was only one piece that really mattered, and that was the hard drive. Kai took a small penknife from his pocket and used the screwdriver to remove the computer's backplate. He pulled the thin component out of its position, and after wrapping it in plastic, placed it in his bag. The rest of the computer was useless, so he left it where it was. Shattering one of the windows, he knocked out the frames until there was a man-sized hole. He chucked the computer out and sat back down next to his quarry. Minutes ticked by, and as they did, he started to get more nervous than he would have liked. He needed to get this over with. The minutes felt like hours. He wondered what McKenna was doing. It was still the previous night there, so the sun would just be setting, probably making dinner, giving the dog too many scraps, he thought with a wan smile. After a few more minutes, the bound spook began to stir. Kai stood up and gave him a strong kick to the gut. He gasped and was instantly awake. "Fuck you!" the man rasped before drawing even half a breath into his spasming chest. "Listen, Mitchell, I know who you are," Kai said matter-of-factly. "You don't know who I am, but you do know how this goes. Half of the questions I'm going to ask you, I already know the answers to. You're either going to talk and tell me the truth, or I'm going to kill you." "Fuck you!" Stevenson spat. "You don't know anything!" Kai gave him another few kicks, breaking at least one of the spook's ribs in the process. "You can kick all you want," the G-Man sneered. "I'm not going to tell you shit. You might as well kill me." "Tell me why you planned the attack on the Sea King," Kai said with forced calm. Memories of Steven flitted through his mind, and he felt his nails dig deep into his palms as he fought to maintain composure. "Who gave you the orders?" The man gave a mocking laugh, so Kai went to work on his face with a dozen punches and elbows, one of which laid Stephenson's nose over against his cheek with a thoroughly satisfying crunch. He grasped the spook by the back of the neck and inclined his chin towards the pier. "You're about to go for a swim, Mitchell. Make your choice." The man spit out a mouthful of blood, but his contempt in his sneering face seemed even stronger than before the impromptu nose job. "You killed Mombasi! You're the guy he called in before he disappeared!" He gave a dark, hollow laugh. "I hope you like pain, because you're going to spend the rest of your miserable fucking life in a little box in the desert." More gunfire erupted outside, long and sustained bursts this time. The fighting was coming this way, and it was coming fast. "Why did you order the attack?" Kai demanded. "Why didn't you send help to the ship?" "Help to the ship?" Mitch laughed. "If I remember correctly, we did send help. That idiotic response team who got themselves killed." A high-revved vehicle pulled up to the building, either a truck or an SUV. It sounded like they were coming inside, which meant the interrogation was over. "Time's up, Mitch," Kai said as he lifted the spook over his shoulder, eliciting a grunt of pain from the man's broken rib. Kai walked over to the window overlooking the ocean and unceremoniously tossed him through. Men were shouting at each other outside. Once Mitchell hit the water, they got louder. Kai climbed onto the windowsill and looked down. It was hard to tell how deep the water was, but he had no choice now. It was about 40 feet down from the window, which he could manage with his eyes closed. Pushing off with his feet, he felt the wind brush the sweat from his face as he fell. Gunshots cracked off behind him, one after another. The water hit him like a cold wall, cleansing away the stinking heat and shocking his senses into focus. He found Mitchell with one look around, still bound with the duct tape. He was struggling to swim to the surface. He was loud and unnatural in the water, like a whipped engine spinning a bent prop. No grace, just a lot of unnecessary motion. Kai made his way over to him and grabbed him by the collar. He dragged him down, easily thwarting the spook's clumsy effort to reach the surface. They descended together, deeper and deeper into a world as dangerous and foreboding to humans as any on Earth. After a minute or so, the spook began to struggle more frantically. Kai held him and continued to swim deeper. Still relatively close to the shore, Kai could now see the bottom. It was dark here, and much cooler. Kai almost wished he could stay. Stephen was at rest in a similar place not far from here. Kai had once heard an old sailor's story that those who died at sea were given vision of all the ocean's secrets in the afterlife. A pair of steel-jacketed bullets fell lazily down to the ocean floor a few inches from Kai's face, and in that moment, he wished that Stephen could see him as he struck back against the men who had taken his life. Mitchell stopped moving coherently after less than 2 minutes, and his body spasmed a few times before it finally surrendered to the watery grave. Kai let go and briefly watched the dead man float into the darkness before he turned back to the surface. Chapter 20. Washington, D.C. 5th of April, 2021, 1300 Eastern Standard Time. The train screeched on its rails as it began to slow, and Leilani felt her weight press into the seat as it came to a stop in front of the station. She looked out the window at the terminal. Thousands of white tiles lined the surface of the brightly lit section of the tunnel. The staircase to the surface teemed with people coming and going. Coming here had been mostly on a whim, and it was risky. Ross would go ballistic if he found out what she was doing, but it was the weekend, so she doubted he would find out soon enough to slow her down. In the days after the sheriff's press conference, she had begun to dig into the Sea King story, and the more she dug, the stranger it got. The yacht had been chartered from an Italian entertainment company, a company which had now been shuttered. Vita Fuga was the name, and it had taken her almost a week to find it. Vita was a private company, so it had no public filings. It was a dead end, but her curiosity was now in the driver's seat. She had called a close friend who worked for the IRS, and practically begged him to see if he could find anything. He had called her and told her to come in person to review his findings, which was the reason for the trip. It all felt very exciting, like something out of a spy film. She made her way off the train, up the stairs, and into the busy subterranean world of shops and restaurants that lined the hallways of the metro station. It had been an interesting week in the news. Mohammed Mombasi, the Somali warlord who planned the attack on the Sea King, had turned up dead. The White House was claiming credit, which made little sense. Somalia was in total chaos after Mombasi's death, with gunfights in the streets and brutal beheading videos popping up on the web. Why would the White House want to claim direct credit for causing all that misery and suffering? Still, bagging a notorious terrorist was always good politics, no matter the collateral damage. It just made little sense militarily, and even less politically. Why now, after all that had happened, would they want to stir up more trouble in Somalia? The world wanted places like that stable and predictable, even if the men in charge were ruthless sociopaths like Mombasi. After all, stability was good for both appearances and profit. Regardless of their reasons for getting embroiled, the White House seemed to support Somalia's incumbent president in the escalating conflict, who seemed to be losing decisively, which was yet another bizarre wrinkle to this already confusing story. Leilani disembarked the train and made her way to the surface. She navigated between stopped cars as she crossed the busy road and made her way to the taxi she had called. It was a cold day, but winter had started to break, replacing weeks of deep freeze with bright sunshine and chilly breezes which blew between the gray stone buildings. Her IRS friend, Brian, had told her to meet him at a small restaurant in Georgetown. She could only imagine why he insisted on meeting in person. Might be trying to sleep with me, she thought bemusedly. She got into a taxi and began the final leg of her journey. By the time she arrived, she was already about 20 minutes late. She thanked the driver and made her way into the small pub. Walking through the door, she immediately saw Brian sitting at the booth, beer waiting. "Hey there," he called out as he saw her enter. They hugged and she sat down. "Thanks for making the trip down on such short notice," he smiled warmly.
"Are you going to tell me why I'm here?" she countered warmly.
Brian's smile widened. "Sure, I looked into Vita Fuga for you." "And?" she asked impatiently. He chuckled. She started wondering if this really was just a ploy to sleep with her. "Well, I have to admit," he began, hunching his shoulders and leaning forward. "When you asked me to look into this, I sort of thought you had gone off the deep end. Maybe you'd gone stir-crazy after one too many insider trading stories," he said, lowering his voice as he spoke. "But I have to admit, I think you might be onto something." There was a bag sitting next to him, which he unzipped. From within, he produced a manila folder. "Now you really can't show this to anyone, but here's what I found." He opened the folder and removed the top sheet of paper. It was a long list of some kind.
"What is this?"
She took the paper from his hand and began to scan down the list. "That is a list of all the assets owned by Segway Capital," Brian explained. "I did a query search from Vita Fuga and it came back with this. It looks like Segway acquired them a couple years ago and just recently dissolved it."
"Who are they?"
"Well, technically speaking, they're nothing," he said dismissively. "They don't do anything. They just own bits and pieces of other companies. It's a private investment firm."
"So you dragged me all the way down here to tell me that?"
Brian grinned mischievously. "Not quite. I couldn't send this over email. But it turns out that Segway Capital actually manages assets for some of the wealthiest politicians in the country. Kind of like a family office." He paused, waiting to see if his words would take effect. Needless to say, they have some pretty interesting clientele. Leilani wished he would stop dancing around.
"Who?"
"Some very well-connected people in the Ansari administration. Segway manages money for a lot of them," he said before leaning back in triumph. "Their largest single account, however, is with Henry Steinway."
"Henry Steinway?"
Leilani was still trying to figure out where he was going with this. Brian beamed, as if he had revealed a great secret. "Yes, so what all this means is that Henry Steinway owns the company that chartered the yacht." Leilani thought for a moment. It wasn't entirely unusual on the face of it. Steinway was a major Ansari donor, so the connection made sense. Donors often gave their political allies and protégés access to their best toys. "And here's the weird thing," Brian continued. "Segway only purchased the company 2 weeks before the attack. After this whole incident happened, Segway dissolved the company. It held it for less than a month and never even made an insurance claim after the incident." He shook his head. "If not for the tax record, there might be no U.S. record at all of this company. And they chose not to depreciate the cost of the purchase. They just claimed the whole thing as an expense. A $10 million expense. Very strange for an investing firm." Leilani could see where he was going. It was all a bit too convenient. It was almost as if the firm had bought the company for the purpose of this trip, and then covered all traces of it when things went south. And there had been nothing in the news about any of this connection to Steinway. But why the secrecy? What were they hiding? Leilani finished her beer, thanked him for the tip, and placed a $5 bill on the table. She had work to do, and was both surprised and mildly disappointed that Brian never did make the anticipated overtures before she left.